Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Old Stickfingers. It is X black-green for a star legendary creature horror. It has, when you cast this spell, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Old Stickfingers' power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. This is going to be a Graveyard Matters deck, the best kind of deck. We'll be running spells to work alongside Old Stickfingers to get as many cards into the graveyard as possible. This will grow Old Stickfingers so we can hit face with it, all while using our bin as a resource and an extension of our hand. Starting off with our ramp, we want the bulk of this to be on creatures. Best of these are creatures that put themselves into the graveyard as they go and get a land. These ramp us ahead while powering up our commander. Next up is our standard dorks. Great at ramping us early and not the end of the world if they get milled or die blocking or even after a board wipe. The main thing is that they're a creature which will help buff Old Stickfingers if they go to the graveyard. Just to make sure we hit our ramp, it may be worth in this deck running some bits that aren't on creatures as well. The reason for this is that they won't get milled off of Old Stickfingers, so we'll still have access to them in the mid to late game. If I'm honest, I think a split of 8 creatures, and then 4 alternate effects, like a Wild Growth or a Talisman or a Rampant Growth effect, are a good place to start. Next up is our card draw. Like our ramp, most of it will come on creatures. Firstly, we have creatures that draw us cards when they come into play. They replace themselves and add to our creature count. I generally want them nice and cheap in this slot, only going slightly higher for cards like Llanowar Visionary, as it also ramps us as well. Cards that mill us further also count as card draw in this deck. We'll have some recursion, so we can get things back that we didn't want to mill, along with effects we actually want in the graveyard, so whatever we hit off these will become an extension of our hand. With a commander like Old Stickfingers, I'm a big fan of cards that let us sack creatures and draw cards equal to their power. With any amount of milling, our commander will get really big. If we find ourselves stalling out, we can just sack it, or another creature with a similar effect, to any of these effects to draw a load of cards and then refill our hand. Greater Good being repeatable does make it a standout, and definitely a card to consider. To those already seeing a pattern emerging, it won't shock you to find we want a large portion of our interaction to be on creatures as well. Caustic Caterpillar and Foundation Breaker do a great job of getting themselves in the bin while removing any artifacts or enchantments that are annoying us. In a similar vein, but for creatures, we have Ravenous Chupacabra and Shriekmaw. And then for some board wiping action, cards like Massacre Girl can take down the board, all while adding to our creature count when in the graveyard. After those, you can look to run whatever efficient bits of interaction that you think you might need. As we always say, this part does depend on your meta, so pack the answers for the threats you think you are most likely to come up against. For some protection, this isn't really a deck that needs Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots to pop off, but cards like Wand of Vertebrae and Perpetual Timepiece can really help protect any key cards in our graveyard. Wrist Reaper is not as good as these, as it doesn't mill as well, but it's one of the few cards that bring things back once they've already been exiled, and it's also a creature, so it is something to consider. Because of all the things we'll be dumping into our graveyard, having some recursion effects can help give us some explosive turns. Generally speaking, having these on non-creatures will be better, as it means we won't mill them off of our commander, but the ones on creatures will still do some work in our graveyard and are generally a bit cheaper on the wallet as well. Talking of cards we're fine to mill either with our commander or with some of our other effects, we can play some cards we can either cast from the graveyard or have additional effects from the graveyard. These are some of the best cards you can play in a graveyard-based deck like this. Gnaw to the Bone will gain you a ton of life. Brawn will give our commander and our other big threats trample, and therefore probably will be the pick of the bunch. Genesis, Dread Return, and Timeless Witness can get creatures and spells back from our graveyard while being in the bin themselves, and then Spider Spawning doubles up as a win condition. Speaking of win conditions, there are a couple of ways we can go about winning the game. First up is cards with similar effects to Old Stickfingers that grow with the graveyard. With all the self-milling, these will become huge threats that we can smash face with. This is one of the reasons I mentioned Brawn being very good, as giving these threats all trample will end the game in no time. These cards are also really great to sack to something like Greater Good to draw us a ton of extra cards. Another way of sacking these creatures to end the game is with Fling Effects. There aren't too many in Golgari, but the ones we have are still very good. The fact that Jared is repeatable and can bring himself back from the bin probably makes him the best one to look at, but the fact we don't mill Rite of Consumption or Final Strike with Old Stickfingers still makes them worth considering, and they're the perfect way to finish off an opponent after an attack. The other way we can win is with cards that deal damage when we mill cards, like Dreadhound and Sir Conrad the Grim. To beef up the mill, we have Altar of Dementia. We'll mainly be using this on ourselves, but late game, if any opponents have dealt too greedily and too deeply, we can sack a few big creatures to mill them out of the game. Then we also have Grist the Hunger Tide, which in this deck is effectively a Swiss Army knife that does everything the deck is trying to do, from mill to removal to winning the game. After those, we have cards that can make us a board state, in a similar vein to Spider Spawning. Both Azoni and Kessage Cagebreakers will quickly get out of hand with all the self-mill that we will have been doing, a perfect late game threat to help us win the game. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, I like Dakmor Salvage, mainly because it has Dredge and I'm a sucker for it, but Bojuka Bog is a good way of answering any opposing graveyard decks. Gaia Reach Sanitarium is good at getting some extra cards in the bin, especially if we have a reanimation spell and a large creature in our hand. And then Drownyard Temple is a solid land that we can run in a 2-colour deck that we can get back if we've milled it and don't want to miss any land drops. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.